Hello out there. Hope you're well. And welcome back to the Today Dreamer podcast. And welcome to this new moment that we're in together right now. I'm Michael, the host of the show, and here we explore what cultivating the practice of presence looks and feels like. Through the show, I hope to help you integrate your own process of doing and dreaming into just being, to be able to participate more deeply in the coming together and the blossoming of the emergent world story. Today's episode is going to be around storytelling, stories, and the knowledge that gets passed down from them. We're going to be talking about sacredness, and we're going to be talking about rites of passage. My guest is Jiro Taylor. Let me tell you a little bit about him to begin with. So Jiro is a guide to those seeking a deep connection with their soul path. His work honors ancient earth wisdom traditions and flows into modern life through nature-based mentoring programs, ceremonies, and wilderness quests, with the intention to help individuals remember the truth of who they really are. This idea of remembering is actually how I came across Jiro's work to begin with. I was having a discussion on a previous podcast with Tim Adelin. If you haven't heard that one and you enjoy this one, then I'll definitely recommend checking that one out. And I brought up the idea of remembering or recalling or coming back into a deeper state of knowing, and he referenced Jiro's work. So yeah, I had a look online, did some digital digging, and it just felt right to connect. I'll keep going with this bio. So Jiro is a founder of Shambhala Warrior, a one-year rite of passage and mentoring program for men on the path towards ecological consciousness and sacred leadership. He works privately as an advisor and guide to a tight group of changemakers and pioneering CEOs. His gift is that of walking the edges and being a bridge between worlds, a synthesizer of diverse wisdom traditions. So yeah, that's Jiro, and we're going to get into a beautiful conversation, or at least we had a beautiful conversation that I'm going to share with you today. So yeah, I hope that you've been enjoying the show. There has been a bit of a pause, a bit of a lengthy pause recently while I've kind of recalibrated things. I've just recorded 10 really beautiful conversations, including this one, with another 5 to come in the coming weeks, which I'll be drip feeding out to everyone while I create many more, hopefully opportunities to have some beautiful unfolding explorations into presence and being and dreaming and doing. So if you're enjoying the show and you want to take things a little bit further, maybe you want to connect on a deeper level by supporting, then the number one way to do that, to support the transmission of these mindful media vibes out into the interconnected sphere of shared space, is to join the Today Dreamer tribe. You can do that by heading over to patreon.com/todaydreamer. Not only that will that help me keep this show alive, but it also supports the intention or what the show stands for. And there's some perks available as well, some sweet little perks that I've set up for everyone that joins the tribe. So these perks range from exclusive podcasts and educational videos to guided meditations, and there's also going to be monthly shared space hangouts where we're going to hold space for one another and just explore what that real authentic intimacy in a group setting online looks like. So yeah, if you're interested in supporting the show, patreon.com/todaydreamer. There's other ways to support the show as well. You can tell a friend about it, and it always makes me feel really nice inside when I receive an email or a comment with a little bit of feedback about how the show may have helped you, or some advice or something you could recommend adding in or changing, or how you felt about, any part of any episode. I really appreciate that kind of stuff. So yeah, just putting it out there, and let's see how this goes. As I like to do before the start of every episode, I'd like to invite you to join Jiro and I to pause for a moment, just to pause from whatever's happening in your life and to take a mindful breath. Usually do this by, as slow as possible and as naturally as possible, breathing in through the nose and into the belly, deep into the belly, pausing at the top, at the crescendo, at the peak of the mountain, and just sitting in that space before gracefully exhaling and pausing at the bottom as well. And when we drop into that space with one another, we'll gently take off into our conversation and see what insights and knowledge and wisdom we can uncover through storytelling and through Jiro's experience. So let's get into that now. So let's close our eyes and, as slow as you possibly can, take a nice deep inhalation into your belly. And when you reach the crescendo point, just pause for a moment. Before exhaling, just as smoothly and gently on the way out. I'm going to leave it to you to kind of see which direction you feel like going into, I guess.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'd say there's a couple of different kind of like story types or narratives to sort of discern between here. And one thing that I want to speak about firstly is storytelling, mythology, poetry, this ancient way of transmitting information and educating. And when we think about it, it's actually the most ancient art form, storytelling. It's the most ancient way to pass on codes and vital knowledge and rituals and sacred information from generation to generation to generation. Stories, songs, myths. I feel like that's one dimension of storytelling, and it's one that I'm passionate about because in our culture that we live in, there's this kind of obsession with literalism and materialism and rationality. And the last few hundred years, the science has become one of the dominating, I guess, frameworks of perceiving reality. And the way that I perceive it is that we all have within us this mythic intelligence. It's this capacity to actually understand a story on a level that's non-rational. Like if you drop into story time and you've got doesn't matter whether they're children or adults, you'll perceive a shift in body language and a shifting to the edge of the seat and a leaning in and a captivation happens. And to me, this speaks to the actual immediate awakening of this mythic intelligence, which is also soul intelligence. And so this mythic intelligence, it's not bound by linearity. Like if we look at literalism and rationality, it's kind of like, it's like our CV, it's like our resume. It's like, tell me the story of your life. Okay, I'm going to write down where I lived, when I was born, what date I moved here, I went to this school, I did this degree, I went to this job, and it's like, here is my life in this chronological linear thing. But it doesn't what doesn't it capture? It doesn't capture the processes, the moods, the grief, the synchronicities, the miracles, the chance encounters, the heroic quest, the shadow work, the like deaths and rebirths, and all of the things that actually comprise of our existence as sentient beings. And so this story, what story does is it evokes and activates this mythic intelligence within us that understands metaphor, and it understands symbology, and it can communicate and express and understand in non-linear ways, which can lead to all sorts of like it's an awakening of consciousness to actually rehydrate and re-enliven this mythic intelligence that we have, and it helps us navigate life on a non-literal way, which really is short-selling ourselves. If we're living in this kind of like literal time-bound way, it's a really short-selling our chance to experience life as these multidimensional sentient beings with all sorts of intelligent systems within us. So that's one way in which I see storytelling as a beautiful way to capture that, to rehydrate that potential within us. And I find it so renewing and regenerative, and it actually helps for me to live through my soul, through my heart, rather than through just cognition and through these sort of cerebral rational frameworks that many people seem to live their lives by. And it allows me to live a more beautiful, rich, nourishing, wise life, because I'm able to absorb the wisdom from ancient stories. I'm able to drop into the myth of my own life, and to actually start to perceive my own life as this mythical unfolding with all these amazing characters, and all these amazing experiences that are like stretching me and contorting me in ways that I can't even possibly give words to. But through story and through metaphor and through poetry, we're speaking the language of the heart and the soul, and there's a possible way to capture this in a more accurate way. So yeah, I guess I see stories as a way to actually like guide us to live in a more beautiful and whole and soul-centric way. So that's one of the angles of storytelling. Is that what you were sort of alluding to?
I wasn't alluding to that specifically, but that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
Mm,
But that's yeah. Let's go with that thread for a bit. That sounds like fun.
cool.
But yeah, just what comes to mind is this, like tuning into or allowing ourselves to kind of be washed over by story, and
Mm,
this sharing of stories, and it almost seems like you're pointing to this, looking at it's like looking through the lens of story and being like doing that on a conscious level, like inviting, even evoking story into our lives, into our very being, through the way we reflect on how we live, and the way we move into moments, and the way we are. And I think there is definitely that thing that does happen. People lean in, and there's like a something that we're just so drawn to stories. And you see it being manipulated in through marketing and advertising, and the inclusion of stories to really sell something or to connect with people, because it seems like we're set up to kind of really flow with stories. That's the way we are. And yeah, the act of storytelling is something I think that's valuable to practice and craft, and inviting story, evoking story into our lives by you know rituals, and the way in which we kind of move about our existence. Like it's a thing, and I think it does make it things a lot richer, like you mentioned, on all those different levels, because there's just like there's something about a good story that it's all about the detail, like it's like those little details, and really pull you in, and they really make you feel like there's almost like I don't know, like a deepening of life, of vitality, a feeling of aliveness, I guess, that takes place through a rich story. Um, it makes me feel alive. That's what comes to mind for me, anyways.
That's because the story is actually a living entity. It's it's got a consciousness of its own. If you take a story, imagine a story coming from the central deserts of Australia that's 100,000 years old and has been passed down and refined and
Yeah.
distilled.
Yeah.
And it's been chosen to be passed down. Think how many stories pass by the wayside and don't get
Yeah.
passed from grandmother to grandson or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. It's the
But
ones that
the ones
really
that do,
connect. Yeah.
yeah, and they contain wisdom. And so the story meets the listener where the listener is at their life. So say that we're hearing the same story. You're moving through something with your wife and you're getting challenged by this, that, and the other. I'm not married. I've moved to a new country and I'm meeting a different sort of threshold, perhaps, or a career threshold. The same story can meet you in one place and challenge you or awaken you or activate something, energize you, and seep into your consciousness, into your body, and sit with you. And it might one day unfurl some gem that will enable you to perceive the way that you're showing up in your relationship with your wife in a completely new way. Meanwhile, I could be on the other side of the world. I've listened to the same storytellers tell the same story, and something completely different is unfurling within my being. And so there's an aliveness to this. It's almost like the story is a living organism. It actually becomes like a million different organisms depending on how many people are hearing and absorbing the story according to where they're at in their life. So it's actually not a static piece of information, right? It's actually living and it's breathing and it's emergent and it changes. And then one day I'll tell that story, and the way that I tell that story will be inflected and infused with exactly the frontiers upon which I've been walking and the way that it landed in my body. That's what's going to come into the medicine of me telling that story, and then it's going to be listened to and passed on again and again and again. It's such a beautiful, beautiful art form, isn't it? Such a profound way of passing down truth.
Yeah, that's what comes to mind for me. Truth.
Yeah,
It's like this idea of like when you hear the truth or when you speak the truth, it's like nothing can get in the way because it's like it's some kind of a direct connection that takes place, and it's like it's a real thing, and that makes sense why the story lasts for generations, and that wisdom and truth that's of the purest essence is passed down you know through different through different vessels, and it changes each time, if it's embodied and it's passed out in a certain way, and then it can be heard, like you mentioned, in different stages of one's journey or different from different angles, and it still kind of hits home wherever you're at. It's not like the truth just fits in, because it's the truth. It's something, yeah, there's something really nice and pure about that.
sure,
Mm.
man.
Mm.
And we can all honor ourselves and each other by telling our own stories. This is really what it comes down to. It's like the opportunity or the responsibility to actually tell our own stories. Um, it's such a beautiful practice. It's something that I encourage the people that I work with to journey into, because it requires us to drop into our truth, right? If we're going to share our story, we have to know our truth. We have to like really understand the mythic or mystical dimensions of how life has unfolded within us, and then give it our best attempt to articulate that. And it's a living art form that we're expressing, and it's such a beautiful thing. I really feel passionate about us sharing our own stories in more regular and bold and courageous and colorful ways, and that's
Yeah,
definitely something that I'm
let's
passionate
do
about.
more of that. That sounds good.
Totally, man.
I feel like
Totally.
you'd be a good storyteller, Jiro. I reckon you'd tell an amazing story.
Yeah, I got a few stories up there, but I also love listening to stories, and honing
It's great. Yeah.
honing the art of listening to story. Um, it's something that actually requires practice. I've been listening to storytellers for quite a while, and there's definitely been an increased ability to listen with the entirety of my being to a story being told, and allowing it to sit in me. It's like you learn to listen not just with your ears, but you learn to listen through every sensory organism or
Tell me
part of
more
your
about
body.
that. That's interesting.
Yeah. Well, there's like listening through the head, I guess, through the ears. Of course we're taking all sound into the ears, but we're listening through the head. It's like it's being channeled through our cognition, through the whirling cogs of cerebral activity. And then there's like listening through the body. And this is where there's an actual somatic response. There's a somatic experience that's unfurling. And as I'm listening to the story, like my body is being activated or challenged, or I'm feeling feels, or my heart is bursting, or my throat is dry, or I'm feeling a twitch in my left leg, or my hips have gone tight, or it's like, but there's actually like a practice of learning how to become embodied and to become somatically receptive to stories, which I'm again passionate about, because I see a whole bunch of humans out there who are rather like walking heads on some sort of biological apparatus to keep their computer bobbling 6 foot off the ground, and I'm seeing a reduction in the human capacity to hold paradox and to really, really appreciate, or to be able to dance in the mystery of life without having to know all the bloody answers and solve all the problems and slice perfection up into a million pieces, because they're actually operating as these cerebral, one-dimensional robots rather than as like fully embodied, multi-dimensional beings with all these different intelligence systems, and therefore the ability to hold paradox and hold mystery and hold conflict and be both in rage and in compassion at the same time, for example. These are things that can't actually compute in cognition, in the mind, So yeah, I find it a really powerful practice to practice. I'm talking about pure presence here, just to make it more simple. I'm talking about presence, nothing more, nothing less than just the ability to be fully here, now. Because it's happening anyway. It's happening regardless. If I can just be here fully now, then it's happening. I'm taking in your face, even through Zoom, it's happening, which is amazing. But like your body language, it's all flowing into me. Mine is into you. The way that I inflect everything is, you are experiencing, you are listening with your whole body. But there's a way of deepening that I feel has been really pivotal on my path to learn how to just be more present and more aware and be able to soak in more information, and therefore to become more aware, and therefore to be more conscious, and therefore to be more self-responsible and contributive to the flourishing of conscious life on earth.
Yeah. Yeah. Two things are coming to mind at the moment. One of them is this idea of like language being so much more than just the words that come out of our mouths, and that there's this felt sense of being around someone and communicating and supporting and loving and sharing and just being. Really, the essence of it is just kind of being around other people. There's something that's transmitted and co-created. I like to think of it through the lens of like vibrations or vibes, and it's like these fields of vibes that are kind of invisible to see with the eyes or kind of hear with the ears, but you can really feel into them if you can drop into that state of being. And there's something beautiful that happens when you're in that state, because you get to really, for me, it's like a feeling of love, because you're kind of feeling into the other person, and it's like this unique being that's got a unique expression, but they're kind of connected to you, and you're allowing that connection to take place. You're kind of encouraging it when you're in that state of being, I feel.
Yeah, what you speak to is what I would describe as true intimacy.
Mm.
Intimacy is often conflated as sexuality, but intimacy is what you just described there, like receptivity and connection on a being-to-being level. You called it love. It's like, yeah, I would go a step further with love and to say that love is the unstoppable emanation from our beings that happens to be regenerative and carries within it the urge for expansion and freedom of the other, or of self. But I feel like this intimacy, yeah, stories breed intimacy, of course. You know, like if I'm telling you my stories, my deepest stories, and I'm telling them from a truthful place, from a raw, cracked open place, from my heart, and you're listening with your heart, and you're telling me your stories from your heart, and this is true intimacy, this is true connection, and this is truly what is yearned for by the human. And we think about conflict in so many different ways, whether it's in couples who are facing divorce, or teenage son rebelling against parent, or indigenous tribe that is being colonized and pillaged by colonial conquestors. Whatever it is, whatever dimension of like relating conflict that we're talking about here, what we're experiencing is a loss or a lack of intimacy, like a true capacity and willingness to actually like listen to and receive and share stories, you know, to like really understand on a really deep level. And so yeah, just to circle back on stories and their potency, I feel like, yeah, it's unfurling within me as a way to deepen intimacy in my personal relationships, but also as a way for humanity to understand how to be in relationship with each other and the earth, and to cultivate greater peace and harmony and coherence by sharing and listening to each other's stories. Sounds so basic and obvious, but it seems rather overlooked.
Yeah. Yeah. I just keep thinking of this idea of like, the second thing I was going to mention was the thought of like, it ties in nicely with what you just said as well, like this idea of like a numbing or a desensitization, or like a, you know, there's been instances where I've been in situations and I've heard almost like a robotic repetition of a story, in different, you know, to different people in different times of the day, or even like I've felt like a sense of repetition and desensitization through being, I guess, I was traveling for quite a while and I came back to Melbourne, and being in a city kind of setting, an urban environment, it seems to be something that washes over us gradually back again, bringing us back into this state of like numbness. It's just something I've noticed with, you know, it even comes down to the sounds that you hear, like mechanical noises, construction, or cars going past. But I think it goes through everything, like social media and different forms of distraction in our lives that are so prevalent and so self-perpetuating. And I feel like it seems as though stories crack through that. Stories have the ability, like we said, to produce some intimacy between people and beings, and allow us to really, I don't know, wash away some of that, become a little bit more sensitive rather than a little bit less.
Yeah, the sort of model that I sometimes think about when I'm thinking about what you just spoke to, is that what is sacred, and what is not sacred. And you could use the word profane and the word sacred, and there's something about, you know, there's a type of existence. You could say that it's all sacred, and of course I'd agree with you on that level, like all life is sacred. But you can also perceive how living through the mind in a kind of robotic, repetitive way, and living in non-truth and just following the herd, and you could say that there's a kind of profanity to it, in the sense that it's non-authentic, it's non-original, and then obviously when we go to much of our culture, I'd say is profane. It's not sacred. It hasn't pierced through to the sacred. And you know, and that's why we're living in a culture that's actually a death culture, that's actually contributing to the pretty rapid destruction of all life on Earth, right? Whereas there are cultures out there that have been regenerative, and they have been sacred in the sense that they're earth honoring and they're regenerative of all life, right? So like, this is what I'm speaking about. Like, the sacred is like, it's honoring life, whereas the profane is non-honoring of life. And yeah, so stories help us break through, pierce through to the sacred. The sacred, this non-sacred world, the profane world, is kind of like this linear, two-dimensional, kind of flat, drab, kind of process-driven, analytical, just journey from birth to death, with some peaks and troughs along the way, like the CV that I spoke about. And so, yeah, stories are like this time-honored way to bring the listener into a deeper knowing of the inherent interconnection of all life. So we can hear a story from 10,000 years ago and it has relevance in our life. Like, huh? That's because it's all connected. We can hear a story from 10,000 miles away and it's relevant to our life sitting here on this continent. Why? Because all is connected. Like, so these ancient stories are like calling us in. They're like songs, like calling us back into the mystery, calling us back into the sacred realms, calling us out of the delusion of profane life as a doing robotic human, and calling us back into the sacredness of being the earth incarnated in bodily form, being wild, being free, being part of the unfolding mystery, and therefore having responsibility for it. Stories are definitely powerful for that, brother. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what came up from your jam.
Yeah. That's beautiful. What's coming up now is just this idea of like, of nature being that powerful as well. And like, just picturing like the numbest, most desensitized individual on the planet, and maybe popping that person or that being into nature, and then like what would happen, like would inevitably,
I can tell you what happens.
yeah,
We do it.
yeah. What do you mean you do it? Can I tell me something about that, some more about that? Because like I want to, I mean, we've been kind of jamming back and forth. It's been really nice, but I'm curious. I'm so curious about your life and about what you do. Yeah, I've got like a fractured picture that I'd like to kind of, and I'd love to hear a
Yeah.
story from you if you want to say it in story form, which I think is like, it will come through anyways. But
Yeah, yeah. See what flows. Yeah, I mean, my life right now, I'm currently sitting in a van, which is my house, overlooking a beautiful valley in the Byron hinterland.
That's so nice.
Um, I'm a wild being that likes to express himself and explore this human experience, and I'm devoted to freedom in its true essence. And so my path through life is to explore the root of freedom, which takes me to the sacred grounds of truth. Truth without limitation, without filter, not truth distorted and actually like fear in disguise, but actually truth. So this is my life. I explore it, I inquire, I take myself on quests. What I was talking to you about before was when I said we do this work. For the last 5 years, me and some colleagues have been running wilderness rites of passage, where we take human beings into wild places and we prepare them in interesting ways. There's a very practical thing around water and fire and snake risk and what to do if all these sorts of things might happen. But actually the preparation on the soul level is all done through poetry and storytelling. Interesting tide of this conversation.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we prepare to drop them into wild nature, to sit by themselves for 4 days and 4 nights with no food and just water, and no pen and no paper and no book and no distraction of any kinds. And we prepare them by infusing their being with ancient stories and poetry, and by guiding them to begin to explore the poetics of their own imagination by writing poetry. And then they go off into the wilderness and they sit with nature. They sit as nature in spaces of silence that few humans in this culture will ever experience.
This is good.
And time just like dilates and distorts and stretches out, and you're left with nothing but what's within you and the mirror of great nature just reflecting back at you. And I've taken CEOs of companies, I've taken people who have lived in suburbs and heavily domesticated lives and live in skyscrapers, work in skyscrapers, I've had clients who have never put their feet on the grass and like throw a little fit if a mosquito lands on them. And then I've dropped them into nature, into these experiences, and I've had the true blessing of witnessing the type of transformation in a human being that is just miraculous. We send them off to the beat of a drum, fire burning, when they're off to do their solo. And it's very mystical, and these guys are all in fear. They're like, what am I about to do? What am I doing? This is crazy. And they go off and we say goodbye. And then 4 days later, at dawn, the fire's burning, the drum's beating, and they come back from their places. So I get to witness in 4 days a human being in front of me, pre-questing and post-questing. And it brings me to tears in that experience of beating the drum and watching them come forth, because I'm witnessing a human being that has faced so much non-truth and faced all of the stories of their mind and all of the projections, and they've looked at all of the trauma, because this is just what happens when we're not distracted by Netflix and iPhones and all sorts of things. We just sit in empty space, and these human beings have done so much processing and so much just being held by nature, and just so much remembering of the wild essence that they truly are beneath the web and the matrix of belief systems and thoughts and ideas and labels and titles and all these sorts of things. Nature just washes that shit off. Nature, silence, solitude just washes that off. You know, it might take a few quests for it to be fully washed. It might take some journeys with some plants. It might take some vipassanas. It might take just more deep process work, or whatever it is that's your pathway. But essentially, it's this accelerated process that nature facilitates of all the artificialness and delusion and fabrication that our egoic minds have conjured up to create this false sense of reality. It just gets washed away in the river. And what's left behind is truth, essence, beingness, isness, soul. And so I get to see these human beings walking from their quest sites, and it's like witnessing a human that's just been the doula of his own rebirth. And there's this radiance, sometimes there's this like physical depletion and exhaustion, but you can see in the eyes, you're like, holy fuck, you've just like touched the infinite.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
What about you, man? Have you spent much time in wild places?
Yeah, I've spent quite some time during the travels, especially, and I think I had this really profound experience where I was like a month in the jungles of Costa Rica, and I felt like that. I think like there's something about long-term immersion that is just like really cleansing on a really deep level. I mean, I'm really curious about what you do with these guys, because it sounds amazing, and it sounds like the transformation it sounds beautiful. Like it really does. It's so nice. It's such a nice thing that you just expressed, and just want to like, acknowledge that, I guess.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah. So I've spent a bit of time in nature, and I've really called to the jungles recently. I feel as though I've been to a lot of different places, had a lot of different experiences, and all of them have been special and unique in their own right. And in different times, I've kind of felt the energy of different types of nature or shades of nature calling. And now I'm really, for some reason, called to like back to the jungle. And I think because it was such a powerful experience in Costa Rica, that I feel as though the jungle is calling me in a sense. but I'm living in an urban environment at the moment. So I'm in the suburbs in Melbourne, and it's like, it's interesting because I'm still relating to nature in a sense. Like I'm looking around and looking at the leaves of trees, and as I'm driving, or, I've got an abundance of plants around me, and a little garden going and things like that. And it seems to be almost more of it's needing to be more of a organized thing now. It's like I've started booking and planning time in nature ahead, and I just kind of book it in. So I'm doing it regularly. I've got a trip coming up in 2 weeks in 1 week now with my little son, and we're going into some nature for a couple days together, which I'm really looking forward to. There's like a beautiful spot with some walnut trees, and there's like a beautiful river flowing through, and I want to kind of take him into the water and have him kind of get his own, natural downloads from being in that space, and kind of, been thinking about him a lot recently, and about kind of him being this kind of extended part of me into the fabric of existence, and like how I want to give him and share as much as I can with him, and have him connect to his wild side as well. Yeah, I kind of, yeah, I don't know. I want to hear more about these experiences though.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm happy to share. It's a big part of my work, and yeah, just to sort of backtrack, it might be useful just to share some story in terms of how I came to this, and
Yeah, let's do that. That's a
sit
good
down with
idea.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So yeah, it's been a long winding road to get to this place of realizing the power of nature, the power of story, the power of like just raw experiences that help us perceive the truth of what we really are. I was born into my mother's like a fanatical Jehovah's Witness. So she's which is it's very culty, and very brainwashing. So from the ages of 0 to 15, I basically had my brain pickled by religious dogma. And at the age of 15, I broke out, and it was like, I guess looking back, it was my first rite of passage. I self-initiated myself into a new level of truth and freedom, which required a lot of courage. I had to, my mother, as far as my mother was concerned, I was choosing death. That's her religious belief. You're either in with us, and you're going to survive Armageddon and live in paradise on earth. This is their belief. Or you're going to die in Armageddon. And I was basically saying to my mom, I don't believe in your shit. And she's saying, you're going to die in Armageddon. And she's grieving
Sounds
that.
intense. That sounds intense.
Super intense.
And it sounds like you would have been brought up in that environment and with that vibe from different angles. And
Yeah,
like, I'm just picturing the journey of getting to that point of like saying that to your mother in that position,
totally.
in that moment.
Totally.
Like, that
Especially as
is,
a big part of me believed that I'm going to die in Armageddon, because that's what I've been pickled with.
yeah,
That's the belief system I've been pickled
yeah.
with. So I'm like, fuck, I might actually die in Armageddon. She might be
This
right.
could, yeah, there's a
Yeah,
possibility.
yeah. So like, I broke out of that, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they call their religion the truth. That's this sort of inner language for religion, shorthand. It's like, oh, is he in the truth? Are you in the truth? So they sort of colonize this language, that they take ownership of this word. And this word, the essence of this word is, I've had to like reclaim it and
Relearn it.
clean it all off
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the irony is that having been spending the first 15 years of my life like kind of like forced into this mold of very rigid, dogmatic, ideological, brainwashed thinking, I've then spent the rest of my life breaking
It's
free
been a
from all of
blessing in
that.
disguise, huh?
It's been an absolute blessing. It's been an absolute blessing. And I've just gone completely radically the other way. And it's radically. And so at the
Yeah.
age of 15, I was reading Nietzsche and Watts and Krishnamurti and
At
studying.
15.
Yeah, because I was looking for truth.
Yeah.
I was like,
Yeah.
these guys claimed a monopoly on truth, and I don't buy that. So my soul guided me, or whatever. Maybe it was a friend, I can't remember, but I was reading Alan Watts and studying Zen Buddhism and Taoism, and I found myself living in Japan for a couple of years, going deeper into those Zen Buddhist pathways, and and learning how to sit in meditation for hours at a time, and really
Was it
not
like
going
temples and
beyond.
stuff, or
Yeah. So I had a temple at the end of the road I'd go to. I wasn't a monk or anything. I would
which
just
part of
go
Japan were you in?
South Japan,
Ah, nice.
Kagoshima it's called. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really it's rural Japan.
Mm.
So I became fascinated by Eastern philosophy and different ways of perceiving self, the universe. Um, and that was really, really fundamental in sort of like deprogramming my mind from this, from first of all, the religious dogma. Um, but there was still some programming in me, lots of programming in me, there still is. Um, so after that experience in Japan, I found myself following this kind of like pre-programmed pathway that me and my friends found themselves on, which took me to the corporate world, like university, corporate world, work in a city.
Consciously or unconsciously, or both, probably.
I remember this choice point, and it was like, oh, I could actually be a monk. Like, I get this. I get this pursuit um, of truth. I understand. I value this. I understand what these guys are doing. It's not just escapism. It might be for some, but I can see I can see the beauty in a life
Yeah.
devoted to space and truth. So there was an actual process where I was like, oh, I could go that way. And then there was this other thing in me, which was like, I don't believe in this cultural myth that success is $1 million and a Ferrari and a yacht and a hot wife and a property portfolio. I don't buy it, but I'm gonna give it a go anyway.
It's like
And
it's like you're kind of almost going against yourself, though. You know,
totally,
and you know you're doing it. You know what I mean? I know the
yeah,
feeling well. Yeah. And
yeah,
then it's almost like and it's interesting because you've had this experience with the Eastern philosophy, and you're moving into this space of like, yeah, this opposite direction. So it seems consciously you're moving into that.
totally,
Yeah.
yeah. And I chose to, like, the way that it worked out is that I ended up being like 25 years old, earning $1 million a year, or $1.5 million a year as a headhunter in the finance industry, finding the best, most talented, most highly paid traders that would be working for hedge funds and banks, and I would find them. I would get to know them. I'd bond with them. I'd persuade them. I'd manipulate them. I'd use all sorts of psychological tactics, and I'd figure out all sorts of things to eventually it might lead to me moving them to my client, in which case an exorbitant fee was paid to me for my role in this transfer of talent from one place to another. Very much like a parasite on a rhinoceros, this rhinoceros being the financial systems, and I was just playing this little role but getting paid ridiculously good money for it. But I was surrounded by some of the most highly paid yet fearful, egotistical human beings on the planet.
That has an effect
Lawyers
on
and
you, right?
bankers.
There's this whole
Totally.
good people effect, or the opposite going on, where there's like this, the vibes are transmitting and you're connecting, and there's again a self-perpetuating kind of system goes on when you hang out with anyone. So that would have had a deep effect on you, I'm sure.
Oh, massive. The corporate world, as I experienced it, maybe it's changed now
Who
a
knows?
little bit,
I
but
think
the corporate world in
it's always
finance and
changing,
banking,
but there's always
yeah,
something. There's always that thing about it. Yeah. What
yeah.
were you going to say?
The way
Sorry.
the way I experienced it was that it's a total fear culture, right? Fear of not having, fear of not climbing the ladder, fear of not earning what he earns, fear of not being able to keep up, fear of failing, fear of getting to the end of your career and you got no money, fear of letting people down, fear of being mocked, fear of being shamed, fear of not making your father or your mother proud. It's like these are the things that are like fueling people
I never thought
in
about
those
it like
worlds.
that. That makes a lot of sense.
Well,
Yeah.
why else would you sacrifice your
Yeah.
freedom
Yeah. Yeah.
and become a slave to a corporation and sell the best years of your life where you could be exploring mountains and temples and playing with your children whilst they're actually awake in the middle of the day, instead of climbing up the stairs to go to some dingy office that's actually like sky prison, where you're going to sell your time
Yeah.
for some promise of security in the future. Why
You
else would
you
you
know
do it
you
unless you're
know
fucking terrified of what happens if you don't do it?
you know what, man? Um, there's this idea that I came across recently. I had a chat with this guy that we were talking about choice, and it was really synchronistic how he came into my life, because I had this. It was like a vaporizer box that I'd bought years ago, and on the back of the box it says something like, you know, love is always greater than fear. You know, always make choices from a place of love over fear. And I read that, and it was, again, another one of these kind of direct lines into truth on a little box, like on a product. And I was like shocked by that. And synchronistically, like, this guy ended up coming back into my life recently, and I got in touch and we had a conversation. But it comes back to this idea of like, it makes sense to make a decision or a choice out of love, and it makes sense to move away from the ones from fear. And once you start embodying that and doing that in your life, I think things start blossoming in unexpected ways. But it's often difficult to get that ball rolling, and it's even more difficult because, even as you just explained all that, I've never looked at it like that, and I've been in that space. I've never looked at it through that lens of, oh yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. You're scared of everything, and again, that leads you to decisions that continue that cycle. How did you break through that cycle? What was the point? What was that moment like? And I don't know if you could maybe go into that a little bit, because it seems like maybe it was one decision that came from love.
Yeah. Excuse my cough. Yeah, man, it was yeah, well, what came up for me when you're just speaking there is that when we are actually mistaking ourselves for our personalities, which is what most people are doing, by the way. Most people think they are this personhood, you know, that works at this bank and goes to jiu-jitsu on Thursday night and likes oranges and supports this sports team and believes this and doesn't believe that. And most people believe that they are this projection. This is really key. I thought I was this projection for a while, but I always had that Eastern wisdom in me. But for a time, I forgot that and became this projection. So I became this ego. Like, I thought I was this ego, and so I developed these egoic tendencies and became quite narcissistic, and like, I loved validation and pats on the back and, Jiro, you're fucking great at this and you're good at this, and I became a little bit of an asshole. Like, I became like, because I was really good at my job and I was high flying and I was making more money than anyone else, and I was just this young punk who thought that he was the boss and king of the world, and it was just like, but the whole time this wiser part of me knew that this was just fake. This was just like artifice. This was illusion. I was just projecting, pretending to be this person, right? The whole time I knew that. And so this gradual sense of like incongruency began gnawing at me on a daily basis. And I'd have these insomniac, like sleepless nights, just lying awake in my skyscraper, my deluxe apartment, just like knowing that there was this selling out, this fakeness happening. This wasn't it. I was pretending to be someone. And it gnawed away at me and gnawed away at me until it reached a critical point of where it sort of like ruptured. And it's not a nice feeling. I don't know if you've experienced, but pretending to be someone and carrying the weight of like this fake like personhood. And what it resulted in me was this, I had basically had like a quarter life breakdown type experience. I was just like, I just didn't want to carry it anymore. I remember this one morning of getting ready to shave, to go to work, to go to my office for the day, like I do every day. And I was just like, like, what am I doing? And I remember like looking in the mirror and like having this real amazing experience of looking at myself and seeing like my soul or my spirit or my essence or my true self kind of like trapped within this like cage of personhood. And I was like, shit, that's me and that's not me. And it was a very, very evocative, transcendent experience that I had. And I began to have more and more of those experiences of just this like remembrance of what I really am, the essence, the wild creature that I really am, beneath the suit and beneath the words and beneath everything, beneath what other people thought about me and what I projected to the world. Beneath that, there's like this essence, this original essence of what I am. I call it my being, right? So it began to just like shine through. And as I began to connect with that, it just became inevitable. I just made rapid decisions and I was gone from that world. And I just made a final cut and I was like, I'm gone. And the people that the company that I was working for, they couldn't believe what I was talking about. They're like, what do you mean? They just thought I was going to a competitor, and they tried to offer me more money, and they tried to like just keep me and guilt trip me. But I was like, no, I'm going to live through the core of my being. And so I moved to Bali, and I just embarked on a radical spiritual acceleration journey, self-guided by myself, and I meditated for 2 to 3 hours a day. I went surfing, I practiced yoga, and I read books on philosophy and consciousness and neuroscience and psychology and shamanism and deep ecology. And I just like infused myself with wisdom, and was living it as well, was exploring it, and I was decolonizing myself of all of these constructs of success that fed my personhood. So all these beliefs, for example, money will make you happy, or money will give you security, or if you make your dad proud, then you'll be happier because your dad's proud. And I just went to the root of all of these beliefs, all of these stories, if you will, and I just began dismantling them one by one by one. Like,
Can you talk to me a bit more about that process?
Yeah, it's refined over the years. Back in those days, the process was more like journal work, like sitting in the surf or sitting in empty space and just being like, why did I do that? Why did I just spend 7 years in misery making lots of money in the corporate world? I mean, like, okay, so I did it because, and I just list a whole load of reasons. For me, it was, I wanted the validation from my friend. I wanted to be perceived as successful. I wanted to make my father proud. I want to feel safe and secure. I want to be able to buy whatever I want. I want to be a successful human being. There are all these things, and I just went to the core of all of them. And I was like, what's the story here? So if I wanted to make, for example, I want to make my dad proud. So I'm like, the story is like, if I succeed in the corporate world, then my dad will be proud. If my dad is proud, then I'll be happier. And it's like, if you shine awareness on these stories, and what I mean by shining awareness on these stories, I mean like giving space to them, to like look at them. The story, like that my dad will be, and when my dad's proud, life will be better. It's like, it's not true. It's just fundamentally untruth. There's not truth there. My dad just wants me to be expressed and happy. That's the truth. And if I'm living in a way that's not leading to that, then that's proving that story is false. So just one by one by one, I just go to the core of these stories, ask myself, are they true? Is it really true?
Could you tell me a little bit more about this looking at aspect of it, this kind of pulling it up and sitting with it, and that, like, what do you, like, yeah, what happens there, and what have you refined that process to?
So this is like self-inquiry 101, and it helps, and then this practice builds self-intelligence, and self-intelligence increases your consciousness, increases your ability to understand what's really going on, why you're doing the things that you're doing, right? Self-intelligence is where it's at. So to develop self-intelligence, you got to learn how to self-inquire. And self-inquire is basically the art of asking a question with your mind and letting something else reply. So asking a question with your mind, like, why did I do this? And then sitting in a silent space, in a meditative space, and allowing the answer to emerge from the core of your being. So it's not like mind having a conversation with mind. It's like mind asking a question and heart answers it. This is the way that I self-inquire. And that might sound a little bit philosophical and vague. So I'll try and like give it some more body. It's a simple process of me asking questions of myself, right? For example, today I've been asking myself the question, I've been going through a process myself, and I've been feeling some pain and some suffering. And an inquiry that I asked myself today is, who is in suffering? Who is in suffering? And so I sat with this question, and I went into meditation, and I took the question to my meditation. And I returned, in my meditation, I returned to the essence that I truly am, beneath the personality. I returned to my true self. And in my true self, there was no suffering. No suffering. There's completeness and wholeness. And so the answer to the question emerged. It's like, nothing is suffering. The suffering is just a story. The suffering is just a story. It's just created by story, because I'm not actually suffering. Suffering is just created by a story of suffering, that something hasn't met an expectation. So the way that this is an interesting thing that I've been exploring. So the ego, I've done, it's really good to get to know how your ego mind, I use the words personality and ego mind kind of interchangeably, right? But this ego mind, it it only operates in the realms of past and future. It skips over presence, and this is why presence
It's a nice way
is
of
the
putting it.
practice.
Yeah.
So it skips over present moment reality. Like the ego mind cannot actually exist in the light of the present moment. That's the truth.
Mm.
So what happens is that a story is created in the past. So say that Johnny, the school bully, stole your sandwiches when you're at school at 7 years old. So you've got a assault or an offense that's happened, and so there's a genesis of a story there. It's like, it might be, I'm not deserving of eating food, or it might be, all people called Johnny are dickheads, or whatever it is. There's something there that happens, right? So a past event. What happens now, because the ego can't actually deal in the present moment, it just like projects into the future. So it takes this past event and it like projects like a projector screen and creates this future reality. This future reality might be like me never eating my sandwiches, or me starving, or me getting like bullied by Johnny, but if I don't give him my sandwiches, or whatever it is. And this is, of course, is happening like all the time, and with every single event that happens in our life, the ego is doing this. The ego is creating a story and a projection. So what ends up happening is that we have these original versions of stories. It might, in the actual experience of the story, Johnny's a bad person and he's mean and he's hurt me and I'm now the victim. It might just happen that if I were to be able to look at this event from a more holistic viewpoint, that Johnny's actually starving, or Johnny has mistaken his lunch for my lunch, or Johnny's got some sort of mental disorder, or Johnny just really needs to eat my sandwiches to help him today, whatever it is. But I don't know that back then. So instead, I've created this story of like bad, right? And this story of bad, which has projected onto the future to create a potential scenario of badness, right? This happens all the time, right? To give you another example, maybe you're getting to know a woman for the first time, and she's and you're relating together, and she's like speaking to her ex-boyfriend over there, and your mind might create this. You got this story in your head. Oh, she's speaking to her ex-boyfriend, and they look like they're flirting, and oh, this is bad. This is threat. So the ego creates this projection of this story, of the worst case scenario, and it might be them rolling together in bed. It might be them creating happy families, but essentially, it's some sort of story, some sort of projection that challenges your core ideas of what makes you safe and secure in life, right? It just challenges all of them. So you end up in suffering. You end up suffering. So the ego puts you into suffering because now you've taken something that was potentially really innocuous and neutral, right? That original event. And you've created a non-neutral, very charged potential reality that is completely delusion based. It's got no grounding in reality. It's completely non-truth. It's false, right? We take it to be true. That's what fuels all jealousy, by the way. This taking it to be true that this might happen. All jealousy is just that. And so all of a sudden we're trapped and we're living in suffering and we have a fear of this thing happening. And so my process has been to get to the source of these things and be like, well, is the original story true?
Yeah, because if you're kind of making it true by believing it in a sense.
Totally.
And that's
totally.
moving in through your system into every one of your motor functions, and then you're moving into that. So it's like, yeah. So keep going with what you were saying, that you're checking if it's true, right?
Yeah. So my basic process is to look at what's unfolded and notice the story that's been created by my mind. For example, my partner speaking to her ex-boyfriend is threatening to me, and she's whatever it is, she's going to sleep with him, or blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, okay, I look at that and I ask myself in a very centered, neutral place. So I come out of reactivity, I come out of my mind, I come into
Yeah.
my body. This is very key, because when you're in that reactive state, it's like you're just operating from such a judgmental, limited band of consciousness
Yeah.
that everything's going to be a threat when you're activated in your ego. But when you come into a neutral place of you're unactivated, you're present, you can perceive reality more clearly.
Sounds
It's
like a
like, no,
place of curiosity. Sounds like a spot where
yeah,
you're like, okay, it's like,
exactly.
it sounds like there's something that happens where it's like the moving from into that, from the reaction into the curiosity. There's something about that I think.
The curiosity puts you into the mystery, into the wonder, into the infiniteness.
Yeah.
That's what it is. So
Mm.
curiosity puts you into the truth of that it's a mystery, that it's unknowable, that it's unknown, that it hasn't yet unfolded. That's what curiosity does.
Brings you back where you are, really. Brings you back
Totally.
into the present.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Out of delusion. That's right. So curiosity is a powerful portal to truth. And that's what self-inquiry is fueled by. Otherwise you wouldn't inquire, because you wouldn't be curious. So
Yeah.
it's like definitely the energy of curiosity. Then you look at the future projection and you're like, look at what my ego's done.
Yeah.
Like, eventually you can get to the stage of having a good old giggle, good old laugh about it. And this is what me and my friends and the people that I work with love doing. We love bringing the projections that are limited, scarcity-based, fear-born minds have put onto the canvas of the future. And as a process of liberation and just bloody good humor,
Yeah.
me and my friends and my lovers and people that I'm with like to like unearth this stuff.
Yeah.
It's a great practice.
Well, it's like it
And
allows you to be vulnerable as well. It allows you to kind of just,
totally.
share these things that, we've all got a different remix of within us and that are expressed in different like scenarios, but it's within all of us. And it's like, there's nothing to be kind of ashamed of. It's nice being vulnerable and, with others. And yeah, it's, I'm sure there'd be some funny stories in there.
Of
Yeah.
course, it's like
And
comedy
moments of
gold.
sharing, as well.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, man. So that's, that's, I can go deeper into that in another time. And for, people that work with me, it goes a lot deeper in exploring the somatics and exploring how stories can, or experiences can manifest as trauma, and learning how to honor and celebrate all that's happened and to release somatically through breath work, vibration, sound, movement, all sorts of different ways. But that's, that's the basics of self-inquiry are what I just described. And so I use that process to uncage myself from this very limited life that I was living, where I was making a lot of money, but I was feeling very unfulfilled and very dead. And so I freed myself.
How
And
you feeling
I've
now?
just been wonderful, free, and expressed and liberated. And the last 10 years since I left the corporate world has just been this unfolding mythic reality of me just creating a beautiful future and attracting in all the people and opportunities that my soul desires to help me expand and
Yeah.
contribute. And
What's been
that's
going
been my
on
life.
over the last 10 years? Like, it's a big question, but like, what happened after that point? I want to hear the rest of it. Like, it feels like you're only
Okay,
part way
cool.
through.
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so I left the corporate world, Hong Kong, moved to Bali, 2 years there, just like really defragged and restored and healed myself, and just came to the center.
Yeah.
And from that point, I began to really, really, really awaken, like awaken to the truth of what I really am. And it's, I didn't get to, I'm not an awakened being. I'm still in suffering a lot of the time, and I'm still in delusion a lot of the time, and my ego like hoodwinks me all the time, and I'm still processing and going through it all the time. It's a, and I, and it's just, the thing is that I'm consciously doing it. I'm consciously aware of what's happening at the moment. So basically I began, after those times in Bali, I I had such profound breakthroughs on in my own life, and began to realize like all the ways in which I had been brainwashed and domesticated and infused with all these belief systems that were not originally mine. And so as I began to sort of like cleanse myself of all of this, my natural essence began to emanate itself. And naturally, I became like a playful, inquisitive, joyful, loving human being. And so naturally, I began to attract other people like that into my field. And naturally, I began to want to express myself in greater ways, because it's just natural, because that's just what our beings want to do when they don't have this condom on that we call our personalities. They just want to like express themselves. That's a weird analogy, weird metaphor, weird image. But you get what I mean. So that's what I began to do. And I just began to see life as a great dance, and I began to share my medicine with people. And eventually I started this company called the Flow State Collective. And this is when stuff began to accelerate in an awesome way, because I had a platform, a podcast, a methodology, a way of working with people to help them cut to the core of truth and presence. And
what was the process of developing that methodology like in those early days?
Yeah, in those early days, I was obsessed with this thing called flow states. You might have come across it in your research, or I'm sure all of us have experienced flow. But in those early days, I was, as a surfer and a snowboarder and a psychonaut, someone that enjoyed working with psychedelics and plant medicines and going into trance states and altered states of consciousness, whether that's in surfing or whether that's on a dance floor or whether that's in a shamanic ceremony. I was very inclined to explore consciousness in those ways. So when I started reading about the science of flow states, which is basically the science of it is rooted in psychology. This psychologist called Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi did the original research on it. It's all very kind of like academic, but basically they realized that human beings were not happy when they had X, Y, and Z, but they were actually happy when they were immersed in activity. And they were extra happy when they were immersed in activity that had meaning to them. And so many thick books have been written to describe that process and what happens in the brain, what happens in the body when a human enters into a state of flow. So I became obsessed with all of that, because I just come from the corporate world, and I saw that all of these highly domesticated, really intelligent, beautiful beings who were trapped in skyscrapers and suits, I felt an urge to help them break free. And I knew that they, from my experience with conversations with so many of them, I knew that they wanted the language of rationality and science to get there.
Yeah.
So I saw flow states as a Trojan horse. This language was so clear and neuroscientific. I saw it as a Trojan horse to help a human being actually be like, okay, I can absorb that. You can keep your chakra shit and your fucking bells and whistles and crystal
Very
balls,
interesting you say that. Yeah.
flow states, I'm interested in. Yeah, I can absorb that. I can talk about transient hypofrontality and alpha brain waves and so forth. So I was like, all right. I saw flow states as like spiritual experience in science clothing. It's no different. A human being, a Red Bull sponsored athlete who's like entered a state of flow, he's just in the same state of consciousness as a monk 2,000 years ago, or a mystic sitting under a tree. It's the correlation between sort of meditative transcendent states and flow states are massive. In other words, the commonality is that when you're in a flow state or a meditative state, the parts of your brain in which are housed your sense of self, i.e. your ego, and your sense of linear time, which creates that linearity, that sort of like logic-based kind of non-mythical reality that I spoke to before.
Yeah.
They're all in the same part of the brain, right? And that part of the brain basically turns off or partially turns off, down regulates. When I read this, it was just like the biggest penny drop ever. I was like, oh my God, it's like you got these, these skiers and snowboarders and people talking about flow states, and you got these entrepreneurs trying to hack the flow state and getting into microdosing and doing Kanban or like time boxing or all these different ways of trying to like get into it. Yeah. But actually there's really ancient modalities for this, like the shaman's drum, or, or like Dagiri, which is the indigenous word for like deep listening, like listening to nature, listening to the birds, or vision questing, sitting in, or like working with sacred sacraments like plant medicines. There's so many different ways. And so I became obsessed with that nexus of science and spiritual pathways. And that is my playing ground. And so I began to run these experiences where we'd go snowboarding in Japan or surfing in the Maldives, and I'd sell out these retreats and get people coming along, and we'd experience flow, and we'd approach it through the scientific frameworks. Like, okay, we need to increase the challenge level for your skill level. We need to work on focus. We need to create this and that. We began to tweak it on that kind of level, which suited their kind of like their cerebral consciousness. But at the same time, there was an infusing of deeper spiritual wisdom by holding space for these human beings to become really present in the moment and to be able to be vulnerable and to just take off the armor that obscured the divinity and the purity of their essence. And so we began to have these sort of this yin yang of like science and spirit, which eventually just fuses into oneness, right? And so that was the genesis of my work with flow state. And from that, I began to get like people requesting that I work with them and to help them transcend limitation. And sometimes it was people saying, hey, I'm a CEO of a company and I need help, like being a higher performer because the challenge level has just increased so much. It's like, all right. So I've worked with CEOs of billion-dollar companies for the last 5 or 6 years. And yeah, sure, I've helped them become really high-performing CEOs. I think some of the highest performing CEOs on the planet. But it's not through teaching them how to hack the flow state. It's by actually teaching them how to come back home to what they really are and to live and express and show up and lead from that place itself.
Yeah.
So that's been my work. And then after a while of coaching and mentoring and developing these frameworks, I heard the call to, I began spending time with more indigenous people in South America, Central America, Australia. And I began to realize that this culture that we're a part of is fucked in so many different ways, excuse my language. And I began to be very receptive to the ancient wisdom of indigenous cultures, especially ones that lived in coherence with natural patterns.
How did you move into that space of being around those communities and tapping into that knowledge and just tapping into that presence with them?
Just made it happen. Like began reading about indigenous perspectives or worldviews, and then began like manifesting it, projecting, like making it happen, seeking it out, in asking questions and finding experiences. And I ended up spending time with shamans from in a few different places in the world, and spending time with mob in northeast Arnhem Land and in Australia, like from a tribe that's been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and they're still singing and the same songs and
how was that?
the same dances. Yeah, man, that was one of the most profound, stretching experiences of my life. To like to be with human beings that are so different that it's actually, you can only relate to them when you drop out of your personhood and you come into your heart and you just become a being. That's the only way I could relate with these humans. But it was challenging on many fronts, because I could see these humans as part of this culture that truly lived in belonging with the earth. And to see that, to honor that, to be like, wow, you guys have been going for hundreds of thousands of years, and you have a way of living that is not extractive, but is regenerative. And you have a way of living that passes down wisdom and knowledge and helps human beings evolve and become mature elders. And it was such a stark contrast to my experience of being part of this sort of like Western culture, where there seemed to be
shit's
a
got
lack
out of
of
hand,
elders.
huh?
Shit's got out of hand. Yeah. Shit's got out of hand. And so it was actually like it was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. It was like exhilarating because there's like, oh my God, there's a template for, people are doing it. We don't need to like remake the wheel. Like, people are doing it already. They've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years. But at the same time, it was like terrifying in a kind of like existential way, in the sense of like, oh my God, we've gone so off the rails.
I think the wheel needs to be remade though, and the bridge needs to come into being between, like what you were mentioning before, these ancient ways and this new language of being that's kind of existing at the moment, this language of kind of that Western paradigm. And I think that bridge is very important, and there's like that work is significant.
Oh, the bridge is important. I don't think we need to remake the wheel, because the wheel's there, and what I'm referring to, the wheel is just timeless, eternal truth.
I get what you mean. Yeah.
But bridges, that's a different story. We need bridges are like an archetype of human being. They're like a modern, they're very, we need all of our bridges. Bridges are the ones that can bridge different worlds um, of understanding, can absorb the wisdom, whether it's in deep ecology or anthropology or indigenous like understanding of their ceremonies, and being able to bridge it and bring it to a different crowd and help there be a flow of mutual understanding across, like through storytelling,
Yeah,
right?
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, we
And
need more of that.
so you were spending time with these guys, and it was like
Yeah,
this sounds like a very profound experience and an opening one where
yeah.
you had some deep realizations and some connections
And these,
happened.
yeah, and these guys, these people are, you know, the biggest difference, if I was to compare, and this is hard to like distill down because the differences are just replete, but the biggest difference is that domesticated, urbanized Western humanity is living in non-congruence with the earth, with nature, and this particular mob were living in congruence and with harmony and with a deep awareness of nature. They were living as one with nature. They were living in this web of belonging where the eagle was their relative and the amoeba is
Mm.
their relative and the koala is their ancestor. And that's, you know, they're actually like in this web of belonging. It's not just made up. Like they actually feel like they're in this web of belonging. Whereas you've got like
Which makes
Western
it
human
real,
beings.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it makes it real. Whereas Western human beings are like, even this fact that we have a word called nature. What the fuck does nature mean? Like everything is nature, but we have this word to actually say I'm going into nature. But it's like,
Yeah, yeah.
what
It's
isn't
like
nature?
it shows you how even language is, or the English language especially, is like formed in a way that has this
Separates.
already, yeah, all this separation built into the system of things, and it's
Yeah,
like we're speaking those words, and it's like we're acting from that kind of a
totally.
place all the time through
Exactly,
words.
man.
Words are powerful, man. Like, I, yeah, just speaking. I've noticed actually speaking words out loud. It's like there's something really powerful about that. Something
Of course,
that makes it. You're bringing you're speaking something into being that wasn't there before,
of course.
and
Like,
it's
yeah,
different from just thinking it. It's a different thing. I don't know. It's a strange thing for me. It's something I'm just kind of on the fringes of
you're,
exploring. But
you're giving voice to something. You're creating something. So
yeah,
you're creating a reality through language.
mm,
So our reality, our Western reality is very much created by the way that our verbs and adjectives and things are organized in a way that creates separation. An example of this is that there's in Australia, there's like 200, 300 different indigenous languages.
I didn't
And
know
in
that.
not in not
Mm.
in not one of them is there a word for possession, as in
For
like
possession,
that's
not
mine.
one. Yeah,
Yeah, as in like that's mine. That doesn't
yeah,
exist there.
yeah.
So think about how that would shape consciousness. So I go up to Arnhem Land, I'm hanging out with these men, and I'm like, oh, he's he's the guy that's taken me under his wing. I'm going to give him some tobacco. But this concept of mine doesn't exist in the consciousness of this human being that I've gifted this tobacco to. So really, I've just gifted the tobacco to all of them, and that's what actually happens. He disseminates amongst his crew because he doesn't have this concept of mine, right? Think about that, how that ripples out, how that
Yeah,
growing up without this concept of mine. Like, think about that. That changes everything.
yeah.
Everything. It changes like they won't have in them this capacity to possess, to own, to control, to dominate, to conquer, to conquest over a wife or a husband or a piece of land. It's not in them without that word. Fascinating. They also don't have words for time, like linear time. So it's like,
Really?
yeah, fascinating. It's like, so think about how that shapes our consciousness as well. Clock time. Like, oh, is
Yeah.
it 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock? It's like all of a sudden we're putting these markers on what is like fluid and infinite. And it's
And
it's shaping.
they've got more seasons as well, don't they? Like, don't they have like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Just as an example, like the last leaf falling or something, or they have like different ways, and there's all these different seasons rather than
Loads of
yeah.
different seasons, about hundreds of different words for rain, different types of rain,
Ah,
for
okay.
example.
Yeah.
Like and you'll see in Inuit languages 100 different words for snow, because
Mm.
there's so much more subtleness,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
there's so much more awareness of
More
the subtle.
detail
It's
in
like
the
how,
story.
yeah,
Yeah.
how could you use that one word to describe so many different like
Yeah.
phenomena,
Yeah.
you
So
know?
it seems like that's yeah, that's kind of carried across the whole theme of the conversation, really. It's just like
It has.
the richness or the details within life.
So just to get back to the story, I came back from Arnhem Land completely transformed, and
Yeah.
I had this knowing that that the most important thing for me and for all life on earth is for human beings to come back into belonging, a true authentic sense of belonging with all life, as opposed to non-belonging, which is existential angst, which is separation, which is aloneness and loneliness, which characterizes the human Western condition to a large degree. We see it in the stress and the suicide and the statistics of what's going on. So this belonging, it got this like knowing that belonging is what counts. Belonging gives wholeness, right? Belonging is the state of being one with all of life, right? I began to dedicate myself to evoking that sense of belonging in other human beings, and so this is where I began working with nature more deeply in wild places and ancestral skills, learning fire making, fire by friction, and shelter building.
I was just thinking about that last night. I really want to start a fire with sticks. Like I was thinking about it last night.
Man.
Like that would be the nicest feeling. Imagine doing that. Wow.
Why would it be such a nice feeling?
That's a good
why
question.
Is it nicer than using a lighter?
That's a great question. I don't know. It feels like it's completely natural in the sense of, like you said, everything's natural and everything's nature, but in the sense of like you're working kind of with nature. You've got this gift to create the fire with these ingredients, I guess. And there's like this, I guess for me personally, and this is just speaking for me, I've had a bit of an issue with starting my fires. I'm very good at getting them roaring in a unique way, but it's just very difficult for me to get them going without help. So I think there would be something within me that is like a process that I'll go through by learning to start with a fire with a couple of sticks, and there's something about the effort that's put in, and then this creation, this working with, this evoking this. It's almost like a magical spell that's been created that creates this thing that then warms and gives back. All these kind of reasons come up for me, anyways. But I'm sure there's many more.
That's right. That's all really beautiful. Like we lead these expeditions where men come along, and one of the things that we do is we all make fire with our hands, with sticks and bow drill. And what happens is it's a very mystical thing that happens, because we're talking about fire. Like just for a moment, let's just drop into what fire actually is and symbolizes. It's like it has the power to give life and to warm up and to nourish, and it has the power to take life, to kill and destroy. It has the power to regenerate soil and forest through responsible burning. It has the power to like disseminate and destroy the forest as well. There's something godlike in the power of fire, right? It's pure death. It's destruction and creation. That's what fire represents, right? This is why all animals have a relationship with fire. Right? You'll see it when the fires are going. You'll see kangaroos and wildlife. They know what's going on. They know what this symbolizes and stands for, right? And so our ancestors, who knows how many thousands of years ago, first of all using flint probably to create a spark, and then eventually using more advanced technology of friction, hand drill, bow drill, began to embody this divine power of creating fire in responsible ways. And there's a sacredness to that. There's a sacredness to it. So what happens when man makes fire in a sort of raw way that uses his body and uses like something primal, like tools, sticks and things, rather than just this convenient button? What happens is that the man naturally drops into the sacredness and the ritual of what's going on. What's like the profundity of what's going on. It's like, I am creating fire. It's like coming through my being, through my hands, and the end result is me birthing an ember, and that ember is going to be blown up into flames, and those flames contain great power and great spirit. And this is what my ancestors have been doing for hundreds of thousands of years. And so there's so much going on.
Yeah, there's a real connection through the ancestral lineage and the collective unconscious, even deep within the kind of, since the beginning of man, really, or since the beginning of man making fires. So there's this and fires are such a miracle, aren't they? Like I think there's all these little miracles that we just don't even realize it. Like, what the hell is a fire? Like, think about it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
And
you notice how all humans love a fire.
Yeah.
Like, and kids will be transfixed by fire, and what you'll often see is humans with this rare ability to just stare at the fire. Like, you could have the most distracted humans on earth but they're just transfixed by this fire. They call it like cowboy TV. It's just like it you in. And it's a really amazing thing, and it's because the way that I've experienced, I've inquired, why is that?
Yeah.
It's because, if you study a little bit of like gene theory and epigenetics, and you realize how much memory is stored in our DNA, and that's passed on and passed on and passed on, and you think about the role that fire has played in the lives of our ancestors, for warmth, for cooking food, for creating that sense of home and nurturance and safety. And you think about the role that it's played in the lives of all our ancestors, and how fire is therefore becoming encoded into their genetics, right? And then passed on generation after generation after generation. No wonder when someone lights a fire, we're like hooked into it. It's like so deeply wired into our being that it is a good thing, that it's a nourishing thing, that it's a warm thing, or that it's a dangerous thing also. There's a responsibility required. That's been my experience of it. It's like this popping up of ancestral memories.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just kind of thinking about this journey that we've just been on, and it kind of like bringing all of this into like, so you've gone through kind of your beginnings with your mother and the religion, Mormon, you said, and then Jehovah's Witness, sorry, and then moving into
Japan and corporate world,
the corporate world, and then we kind of visited this rebirthing of Jiro, and this new space and time with the elders, and that kind of the resonance of that time, that a profound effect. And then now it seems like there's this radiating outwards and sharing kind of it's a beautiful story, man. Is it like what's going on if we bring it right to this, like what's going on now in the here and now with like in these days, and like what are you up to and stuff, because it seems like I'm getting a real liberated feeling from you, like a freedom is emanating out from your being, which is it's refreshing, dude.
I'm very devoted to freedom, so much so that 4 months ago I made the choice to end the marriage that I was in, and because I saw how not that marriage compromises freedom, just that this particular marriage compromised my freedom. So I ended that. So there is a freedom that I'm exploring in all dimensions. But there's a great freedom in my work as well. Essentially, I just do what feels is my truth, and what is my calling and my purpose and my mission. And it's a very I take a very non-strategic approach to my work. I simply just like give it. The way that it works now is that I support about 40 humans across the world through mentoring. So I'm very passionate about mentoring, which is different from coaching, and it's a softer, more dialogue-based approach of holding up mirrors and creating a container in which truth can emerge.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. So I'm in a mentoring process with a bunch of humans from across the world. I run a men's program. It's a launch pad for spiritual growth and also business success that's regenerative and purpose-driven. That's called Shambhala Warrior. So some of my time is allocated towards that. I also lead these vision quests and expeditions into the wilderness. I work with some of the plant medicines, and I spend vast amounts of time in nature myself, surfing, playing guitar, taking myself on my own journeys.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so, and in the background, me and a colleague are preparing to launch this new business, this new offering called the Brotherhood of Man,
Tell me
which is
about
going to be a
that.
platform. Yeah, so it's going to be a platform for modern day men's work. Basically, men have gathered together forever, hunting parties, taking down woolly mammoths, whatever. But in our culture, brotherhood has kind of been reduced to like sports teams and getting together on a Friday night to sink a few beers. And there's a element, it's profane. There's not much sacredness imbued in it. And at the same time, we seem to be living through a crisis where a disproportionate amount of men are killing themselves, and there's shocking statistics on stress and suicide. And basically, it's confusing. Like, how do I be a man? Like, what is it to be a man? Um, so I'm passionate about doing something about that and helping men experience what it is to be a man, not through any concept, but through a natural emergence of their essence. So Brotherhood of Man is going to be a business that's going to have experiences and mentoring programs, but also a podcast that's going to be launching in the next month or so.
Exciting times. Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Super
If
exciting
there's
times.
anything I could do to support that besides sharing this conversation and getting the message out for you, let me know, dude, because I'd love to help you kind of get that blasted off. I know
Thank you.
it sounds like a beautiful thing and exciting times.
It is. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's probably a good place to kind of tie things off. I feel like we've had a really engaging conversation, and I really think that again, I want to share my appreciation with you. And I think the people listening, like there's plenty in here to kind of work with and like we said earlier about this idea of truth being able to kind of sit into the space in our lives where it's needed most at wherever we are, And I think there's been a lot of truth shared in this conversation. And again, like I just want to really thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
Mm.
Thank
Cool,
you for
man.
the questions and the inquiries.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Today Dreamer podcast. Hopefully you've found something within it that will allow you to deepen your practice of presence and cultivate that within your own life. As always, if you'd like more information on the guest or their work, please head over to the Today Dreamer website, todaydreamer.com, or check out the show notes or the description section wherever you're engaging with this, and there'll be some links to their wonderful and inspiring work there. If you'd like to deepen your connection with me, with the show, by showing your support and helping me keep this project, this intention alive, then please consider joining the Today Dreamer tribe by heading over to patreon.com/todaydreamer, where you can pledge a small amount every month, and in return you'll get certain perks depending on the amount you pledge, including exclusive podcast episodes, videos, video chats with me, or group hangouts in supportive space where we can really look at meaningful action and support one another in this process of being, doing, and dreaming. Thank you so much. That's all from me, and I will catch you in the next episode. In the meantime, be well.